In the early morning hours, the teenage divers Mike and Jeff set out after deciding to go to a large cruise ship that had crashed on the shore 10 years ago. The ship didn't appear to be very robust, and it was anyone's guess what they might have discovered on the interior. It was possible that it would be quite hazardous, and there was no way that they could make it back to the beach in time if something were to happen to one of them while they were out there. But Jeff didn't listen, and already he was seeking for a means to get into the building. They were able to detect the foreboding vibe that pervaded the cruise liner as soon as they stepped foot on board it. The only sounds that could be heard were the creaking of the metal framing and the sound of the water lapping against the bottom of the tank. They both exclaimed, "Wow," in perfect agreement. Mike suggested we ought to go BA, but Jeff had already left the room. They entered the grand and spacious main hall first, which had high ceilings all around and a huge staircase leading up to the top decks. After that, they proceeded on to the cabins. Jeff and Mike heard a strange noise as they walked through the empty halls of the ship. Mike was alarmed and asked Jeff if he heard it too, but Jeff didn't seem bothered and just shrugged before walking on. After a short while, Jeff expressed curiosity in exploring the ship's lowest levels deeper below deck. There was a narrow staircase leading to their objective, but it was absolutely dark. Both Jeff and Mike were completely freaked out by the sound, which resembled a muffled scream but was much quieter. They stared at each other with terror in their eyes. After a short distance of walking, they eventually reached their destination. They were puzzled as to why there was a dead end, as they were aware that there was no way for them to reach the bottom of the ship. Mike noticed a door in the corner. The door was jammed, so Jeff grabbed the doorknob and yanked as hard as he could to open it. He put his ear to the door and listened carefully from there. He moved next to Mike and did the same, pressing his ear to the door, saying, "There is no question that the sound is emanating from within this space." They were startled when all of a sudden they heard something that nearly caused their hearts to stop beating. They could hear muffled noises of men arguing with one another as they approached the ship in a boat, and the boat was getting closer. It sounded like they were also getting onto the cruise ship. Mike said, "Ship," before continuing, "I knew this was a bad idea." They were conscious of the urgency of their situation. They quickly made their way back to the stairwell, but as they were ready to begin climbing them, they heard a set of rumbling footsteps coming from below. To avoid being noticed, they quickly spun around, pulled out their flashlights, and crouched under the stairwell. They held their breath in expectation as the males drew nearer and nearer. As they descended the metal ladder, their loud footsteps filled the ship. 3 men came down the stairs and went straight to the closed door as they were being observed from where they were standing. When the men opened the door, Mike was able to observe what was happening inside. The murmured wail suddenly became much louder. "Shit," he said under his breath. "We have to get out of here as soon as possible." Mike and Jeff were outnumbered by those individuals, and not only that, but those men were far larger and stronger than Mike and Jeff. Mike also observed that one of them was carrying a gun, which made an already difficult situation considerably more difficult. They decided to call the police, but realized it might take a while. So Mike gathered his courage, agreeing with Jeff to peek behind the closed door to see what the men were doing. Cautiously, they approached the exit, listening carefully to the men's conversation as they went. He couldn't wait for the police to show there because he felt like his heart was about to break out of his chest. Jeff replied in a quiet voice, "Okay, I am making preparations." Jeff quickly retreated into the shadows as Mike's eyes opened in surprise. The man who had been left behind in the room dashed out the door and headed in the direction of the stairs. Mike and Jeff emerged from the darkness and made a dash for the room as soon as they could only make out the muffled sounds of footsteps. Jeff pushed open the heavy door and entered the building, but just as Mike was about to follow suit, he heard the other men coming back up from the basement. Mike was at a loss for what action to take and froze up. There was a clear physical altercation going on between Jeff and the other man, and he could also hear a woman crying, although it seemed as though she had something stuck in her mouth. Mike and Jeff went straight for the woman. She was chained to a chair against her will and restrained, the duct tape covering her mouth. Her hands were untied by Mike, and her legs were untied by Jeff. They were some ways away, but they still heard the police sirens. They assisted the woman in standing because she was too frail to do so on her own. When the police did finally arrive, they were completely taken aback by the scene they had been summoned to. They were really taken aback by what they observed. They entered the building at a breakneck pace and detained the two men. They were successful in getting the woman to a safe location, but Emke and Jeff were required to accompany them to the police station. Jeff and Mike were questioned at the police station, and they were required to provide an account of everything that had taken place. They weren't supposed to be on the ship in the first place, so they were scared that the police would arrest them for it. However, the police reacted in a way that was totally different from what they had anticipated, and they were relieved. Jeff and Mike are commended for their bravery, so they are not arrested by the authorities. It was later discovered that the woman they had spared was not a typical woman in any way. She was the daughter of the governor, and she had been held hostage for the past few days at this point. The individual had previously requested money, but then suddenly severed all communication. It's likely that the woman won't make it through the night thanks to Jeff and Mike's quick thinking. The governor thanked the young guys and gave each of them a hefty check for their heroic actions in rescuing his daughter. Jeff and Mike were both still in shock at what had happened. They found it hard to comprehend that this was actually taking place to them.